to Saturday Night at the Movies, the podcast that celebrates classic, cult, and current films, and the people that made them, and many other aspects of pop culture. I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer's Ben Shrewsbury, and our signature theme was composed by Greg Lehrhoff. Here it's always Saturday night, and our mission is to chronicle film and pop cultural history one memory at a time. Tonight, we welcome back Nat Segaloff, a writer, broadcaster, teacher, film historian, and raconteur with a varied background in motion picture publicity, journalism, producing, authoring, a lot of books. This week, we talk about Nat's book, Big Bad John, the John Milius interviews, a
I will hold
compelling,
up right here.
there you go, a compelling compendium that sheds enormous light on one of Hollywood's true maverick filmmakers, Mr. John Milius. Welcome back, Nat.
Good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And John Milius, what a subject. I think I told you that I got a chance to work with him. I was over at Showtime in the 90s doing publicity for them, and I was assigned to a TV series called Rebel Highway, which featured an episode. They're all films, kind of all remakes of AIP genre classics or infamous classics of the 1950s. And one of them, of course, was Motorcycle Gang, directed by John Milius. So I knew his work, but I'd never met him. So I go out to Palm Springs where they're shooting, and I get out to the set, and I'm directed to his headquarters, which was a military tent. And interestingly, there's a skeet shooting apparatus right in front of the tent. And there's John, and he's got the proverbial cigar. It was like walking into a time warp. And I pictured Howard Hawks, John Ford, name any macho director of the 40s, and John could have easily fit into that amalgam. Tell me your journey to, I mean, you obviously based this on a number of interviews with John. Where did the idea come from?
Yeah, before we do that, John has said, and it's a line that Elaine May had in a movie called A New Leaf. John has said many times, I'm keeping up traditions that were dead before I was born. Um, um, I I met John by rumor first. I was helping to do publicity on a 1972 film called Evel Knievel, which was starring and produced by George Hamilton. And Hamilton, who is one of the splendid people of all time, was talking not about himself, but about this great screenwriter from USC named John Milius. And I made a note of that name, and the next year, when Milius had made his first feature film, Dillinger, I was working as an exhibitor in Boston, and I requested that AIP, who I knew from having worked with them, yada yada, send John out for some press interviews. They must understand John was fairly conservative, and here he is landing in Boston, which was the bastion of liberal journalism. And so we had a great time together because he absolutely charmed everybody, all of the college press, all of the local press, who loved the film, which was very helpful to have a good first film. And he was just wonderful. He arrived with Michelle Phillips, who played in the movie Dillinger, and of course was previously one of the mamas and the papas. And she was absolutely charming and, of course, drop dead gorgeous. And John and I simply got to be friends. And so when I was transitioning from being a publicist to being a critic, I happened to be flown out to California for a junket of some sort at Columbia Pictures. And there was John at the bar eating some Chasen's chili and not drinking. So I went over next to him, reintroduced myself, and we struck up a conversation while everybody else was talking to all the other movie stars. And this went on for 50 years. Every time I was in California or every time he was in Boston pushing a film, we'd get together. And at a certain point, it was about well, I guess maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I decided to compile all of these interviews. I originally wanted to do them for a book called Backstory, which was edited by Patrick McGilligan for the University of California Press. I expanded everything and turned it into this full-length book, did many, many more interviews right up to 2001 with John in his offices at Warner Brothers and put the thing out. And I'm very proud of it. It's very informal, and it is not the John Milius that anybody knows.
Well, I have been a student of history all my life. It was the subject I majored in at UCLA. I've read history books forever, particularly military history from an early age. I was fascinated with wars and battles. I mean, growing up in the late 50s, World War II was still very fresh. It was on TV and on combat, starting in 62. It was in every other movie. There were books. There were even kids' books on World War II. One of my first favorite little books was called We Were There at Pearl Harbor. And that,
The
that
strange.
there was a whole series of We Were
Uh,
There books where they took kids, teenagers, and put them in historical incidents.
ah,
But being shown into the presence of John Milius, who, if you broke him open, would be just all history all the time. I mean, he was, well, there's so many things about John that are fascinating to me, but at a time, you mentioned liberal Boston, the filmmaking world, let's face it, the filmmaking world's a very liberal world, and the subject matter can be very liberal and certainly diverse. John stayed has when he was at his heyday, he stayed in his lane and he brought history to life. Much of his, I mean, obviously, a movie like Big Wednesday isn't so much about history; it's about his passion for surfing. But his love of history, even in projects he hadn't quite made yet, just sitting there one day, because I went to him when I was trying to get a remake done of A Walk in the Sun, the great
hmm.
1945 World War II movie that starred Dane Andrews. And John was attached to it for a while. And he was just telling me all about one of his Viking movies, I think the Leif Erikson movie that he wanted to get made. And the way he described it, it was like being in the presence of a great historian, who really reveled. I mean, if we went back centuries or thousands of years to Josephus, from Hebrew history, you probably picture him somebody like John. Obviously, the history part of it fascinated you, and certainly would probably be a part of a lot of his interviews. Define him in your way. Define him what would you say defines John in terms of what he's all about from all those interviews?
John is a romantic, although you wouldn't know it if you look at his films just on the surface. He is a romantic, he is a historian. He also is imbued with one of the finest senses of honor that I've ever found in the film business. Notice we haven't even discussed politics because friendship, honor, and commitment and loyalty transcend everything else. And John, to me, embodies all of that, especially with the films that he makes. Also, the oral tradition. And this, he says, comes from hanging around surfers and having been a surfer during the heyday. He talks about before the great waves were ridden in Hawaii, Mickey Munoz, the great surfer, would repeat the St. Christmas Day speech from Henry V to try to get all the other surfers into the right mood to go and conquer the waves. This is John, and everything he says makes you want to write it down. He truly is quotable. Now, I'm not talking about this fulminating guy who wants the world to be an absolute monarchy and he wants to be the monarch. We're talking about a man who has a good sense of history and character. He's not showing off, at least he didn't with me for half a century.
Would you characterize his writing style? I mean, I even was reading one of the descriptions on Wikipedia, which can be terribly inaccurate, but it mentions that there is a Hemingway quality to his writing. He obviously likes to write about men. He's not a type of writer you bring in for a romantic film per se, but he's very keen on writing. And it seems to me his subject matter leads one to believe he's kind of a little bit of a throwback. I don't think there's anybody today that I can think of that is like John Milius.
No, in fact, there can't be any more. He once said he has 16 sole screenwriting credits, and he says that'll never happen again because everybody's being rewritten these days. But if you look at his films, and I think for the casually initiated, we should probably mention some of them.
Well,
Farewell to the King,
well,
Red Dawn, The
before
Life
you
and Times of
before you do Farewell to the King and Run, they're on my list. But for those of us who are watching us on YouTube and True TV Plus, I have some images I can put up. But I think if we're going to start, we should probably start with The Wind and the Lion. I know we
Oh
mentioned
well.
Dillinger, but obviously The Wind. This is the 70s. There are a lot of auteur filmmakers coming up. This is a new wave. This is where so many filmmakers started their careers, and Hollywood was changing, and yet there were things that worked in the 60s, and they work again in the 70s. Certainly, the epic film, the with a great canvas. I've got to think that The Wind and the Lion is definitely the next step in the era that produced Lawrence of Arabia, The Longest Day, Ben-Hur, The Ten Commandments. The Wind and the Lion is a terribly romantic film in a sense. It's not really so much a love story at all, but it's certainly a romantic look at, an amazing figure played by Sean Connery.
The Wounded the Lion is really John's David Lean film. It's the story of the Raizuli, played by Sean Connery, Lord of the Rif in Morocco, who kidnaps a woman, Eden Petikaris, and uses her as a hostage because he wants President Roosevelt, that's Theodore Roosevelt, to come and fight him. It's a matter of individuality, and it's a matter of the freedom of the Rif and of who the last of the Barbary pirates, which is what Connery plays. Now, of course, in real life, there was a gender switch. It was, in fact, a character called the Raizuni with an N, who had kidnapped Ian Petikaris, who was the American diplomat in the area, not Mrs. Petikaris. And this was written in a book called The Lion of the Desert by Rosita Forbes, who was a travel writer. And now there's some indication that Mrs. Forbes may have had a relationship with the Raizuni. When I was writing the book on Milius, I was able to get a copy of Forbes's book, which was available in Australia. Thank heaven for non-Amazon sources for getting books. And John picked up the book because obviously he had seen it before, but no one had ever shown it to him from the press. He said, "Yeah, yeah, this is the book." And we changed the subject after that. John had, of course, invented so much, especially with the Marines coming in to protect the American interests in this country. And Secretary of State John Hay, played magnificently by John Huston, telling President Roosevelt, "Eddie, you can't do that sort of thing." And Roosevelt saying, "I want respect. That's what I want for America, and I'll send the troops to Morocco to get it if I have to." Played incredibly well by Brian
Oh,
Keith.
Brian
So
Keith.
yeah, I'm off on the film too, same as you are.
Oh, yeah. And when John's talking about the Win the Line, I would hope that he's very proud of it.
Oh, sure, sure. It's interesting that he cast John Huston too, because he and Huston had a falling out of sorts. Because John had written the screenplay for The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean with Paul Newman, and which everybody called a Beverly Hills Western. The script had sold for $400,000. Now, it was $200,000 if John was to direct it, but because they didn't want John to direct it, they doubled the price. And he said, okay, $400,000. And it was kind of botched by Houston because he didn't get the humor. Houston has one kind of humor, Milius had another kind of humor, and it didn't quite work. And so John, although he respected John Huston, forgave him and hired him to play in Wind of the Lion because, let's face it, if you've got John Huston, you should use him. This is the ability that he had of getting ired at somebody at the same time being enamored of somebody.
Oh, yeah. And obviously, at a time when character actors, true character actors, are in short supply, getting a John Huston into your movie gets you levels of excitement that we don't really have anymore. I'm not saying that character actors have disappeared, we have them. But nothing like during the studio system when every studio had like 47
Yeah.
guys who were their normal guys. And I thought that everybody was terrific in that movie. I'm curious, did John have anything to say about the gender switch?
No, it was just, as you kind of alluded to before, it wasn't a romance, but it was a kind of romantic film. The idea of it being chaste, of Mrs. Patakaris being married and the Raizuli respecting that. And you know there's a sexual tension between them. My God, it's Candice Bergen and Sean Connery. But at the same time, they respect each other. And we're talking about a time during essentially World War One, where people just behaved themselves. That was the whole point. It was what wasn't said that was more important than what was said.
Was he satisfied with the way the film turned out on every level, or were there some things that he would have liked to have changed?
Oh, I didn't really think he would want to change anything. He got the film made from MGM. It had a great Jerry Goldsmith score, terrific photography by Billy Williams. I mean, what could go wrong? If it had done more money, I'm sure he would have been happy, but it did pretty well.
Yeah, no, no, no. And I think I miss films like that. I think that we occasionally get a Gladiator from Ridley Scott. We obviously hitting all the numbers. But I'm such a fan of the movie, and you mentioned the Jerry Goldsmith score. It's a wonderful score. I'll tell you a funny story. Um, when I first heard of the movie, a friend of mine called me up and said, "We can't go see it." I say, "Why?" Because the animal rights people are in an uproar that they heard all these horses in that opening sequence. They used the running W, which is illegal to use in films, which of course was somewhat, controversial. But interestingly, in reading up on the movie recently for my classic film review, I discovered that horses were not heard on the movie, that it was a big brouhaha that wasn't really true.
There may have been some action against John because of his politics. I don't know. I do know that I was working for United Artists at the time, and that was when the Mayaguez incident happened. If you recall, the North Koreans were holding sequestered an American warship called the Mayaguez. And there was some question about then President Gerald Ford sending in the troops to try to rescue the ship. Well, of course, United Artists being right on top of it, we put out one of the scenes of the movie of The Wind and the Lion, which showed how President Roosevelt was going to send in the troops to rescue Mrs. Petticaris. I don't think we got much play in the news broadcasts, but it was a nice little moment for publicity people like me.
Well, we're talking about a movie that's crazily 50 years old. If it was opening tomorrow, I think it would be a bigger hit than ever. I think this perfectly, I mean, here we're opening the newspapers and watching American warplanes attacking drug runners in the Caribbean. You got to figure that this would play right into that. But it's a marvelous film, and I just love it, and I think that probably it will be the film people most remember about John, perhaps. What do you think? Of course, his writing credits are equally as strong.
Sure. Let me tell you a kind of a footnote that involves the film but isn't the film. I was having lunch at the Jockey Club in New York, that's in the Ritz, with John and his wife. Oh, gosh, I don't know, man, how many years ago, maybe 20 or so. And all of a sudden, this spectral white-clad figure stands in the doorway to the restaurant. It's Sean Connery with a perfect tan, perfectly trim, wearing this white linen suit. I catch his eye first and I look over and I said, John, I think somebody you know is just entering. And John looks over and he says, Ah, the Raizuli. And Connery enters the room and walks right over to where we are. Now, you have to understand, there are very few movie stars who are like Sean Connery. You could feel the room move back to accept his presence. John introduces us around, and we have just a few words. Connery had had some sort of throat operation, so he didn't have time to talk very much. But he was so gracious that he went over to meet somebody he was supposed to meet. But the idea of literally the Raizuli coming in and saying hello, it's one of those moments. It's etched into my mind forever.
I was very friendly with a cinematographer, John Schwartzman, who's done a lot of major films. He works a lot with Michael Bay. He worked on let's see, what's the movie about taking over Alcatraz where Sean plays
The
Obama?
Rock.
The Rock. He's working on The Rock and he's the DP, so he's got a fairly high level position. So he goes out to dinner with the director, Michael Bay, and Sean Connery. So at one point in and John loved telling this story, he turns to Sean and says, "Do it." And Sean looks at him kind of quizzically and says, "You know what I mean, do it." Sean Connery turns and says, "Bond, James Bond." Talk about iconic moments. Well, let us move on from the Wind in the Line, which we can talk about forever. Let's talk. Well, you mentioned Farewell to the King. It's a little further ahead, but it's certainly, again, a fascinating arena to do a movie. I mean, this is Nick Nolte plays a soldier who's on the Bataan Death March and escapes into the jungle from the Japanese, and it's almost, how would I describe it? It reminded me a little bit of one of John Huston's movies, The Man Who Would Be King. It's
Hmm.
kind of cut from the same kind of cloth. Tell us a little bit about, for those of us who don't know the movie, tell us a little bit about Farewell to the King.
Well, written by Pierre Schondorf, I think. I'm messing up my German. It's about Leroy, who is played by Nick Nolte, who is kind of an outcast, and he sets up his own tribe. Really, he's the person who comes in, and it's kind of white man burdening in a way, where the tribesmen all gather around him, and he becomes their spiritual leader. And two important things happened on the film. One, John got rid of his asthma. Somehow the climate helped him. He went back to smoking cigars. God forgive us. But he also, I think, solidified his belief of what leadership really is. And he's talked a great deal about that, whether it's Genghis Khan, who he's been trying to make a film about for 40 years, or any other leader, a spiritual kind of leader. And that is that the greatest leaders are those who know when to quit, who don't let their people see him become old and decrepit. They want to leave them with a certain spirit of the future and of the grandness of the king. Farewell to the king says that all as they go off somewhere else. Now, the film doesn't necessarily reflect that, but it's almost better for a king to die in battle than it is for a king to live in retirement. And Farewell to the King is about this ethic of what leadership is and what the responsibilities are of leadership that fall upon you. That's the other thing that very few people talk about.
It reminds me a little bit of, and of course, John wrote the script with Francis with Apocalypse Now. It's kind of a little bit of Kurtz's operation, operating his own little group of irregulars in the Vietnamese jungle. But Farewell to the King, I believe, was not a success at the box office.
It wasn't. It was a bit too heady, I think, for most people. Also, it was very heavily cut by the studio, Orion Pictures, who removed something like 15 minutes from it. There was a romantic subplot that they didn't think worked. I don't know what happened to the footage, and John is bitter about it and really wouldn't discuss it.
Interesting. Well, having mentioned Apocalypse, we should probably talk a little bit about Apocalypse. I think people forget that John was very involved in writing this movie, and it seems to me there are so many iconic scenes that are pure John Milius. I would think that Kilgore's speech about the napalm seems like pure Milius.
It certainly is. And Kilgore's original name in the first script that John wrote was Carnage, Kharnage. But I think they changed it because you'd lose the pun. Many people, and I'm sure you know this too, are aware that Apocalypse Now was written as a film for George Lucas to direct in the middle 60s. And they were going to film it in 60 millimeter. They were going to film it in Vietnam, which was still a war zone at the time. But they figured, what the hell, we'll go and make a movie there. And it was a little bit more cut down, hardly as operatic as Francis Ford Coppola brilliantly made it. But it was a film very much about what happens at the beginning when you're going to train these troops and they're going to do what you say. And then at the end, they're all firing their guns into the air because that's what they do, even if there's not an enemy there. It's a very complex film, but I think Coppola certainly added an awful lot to it and made it, as I said, operatic and grandiose. And bravura, I guess, is the word.
They,
But
they,
John, the napalm in the morning scene, anything that seems to be over the top, John would have been part of. But again, it was a collaboration between John and Coppola.
you're telling me that in the 60s, during the Vietnam War, they were thinking of going over to shoot it there, or is this 70s,
Well, it has to be the late 60s
late
or early
60s?
70s. They were still at USC at the time.
Oh,
But yeah, they were actually going to shoot it off the back of a truck. It was nuts. Of course, it was nuts. But when you're young, you can do anything. I meing, that's why they draft kids that age because they think they're going to live forever. John was, of course, exempt from the draft because of his asthma, and George, I suppose, because he was in that horrible car crash. I don't know the other details.
well, you mentioned George Lucas. Obviously, George Lucas is very friendly with Steven Spielberg, the all part of that same group at that time. And Steven is making Jaws. And I think another moment of John's brilliance, I believe, was contributing to the Quint speech. What do we know from your point of view? What does John say his involvement in that speech? It's one of the classic speeches in cinema history.
The Indianapolis speech, sure. Well, John's version is that they had to find some reason of why Quint hates sharks. And Stephen, who was on Martha's Vineyard at the time, called John, who was in California, and said, "We need a speech." And John said, "Well, there's probably a couple of things we can choose." And according to one version, he dictated the speech on the phone, but actually he wrote it down and got it to him. Now, Carl Gottlieb, who was the credited screenwriter of Jaws, has another version, and Carl is a good person. and also Peter Benchley supposedly had some input as well. What actually seems to have happened is that a number of people provided drafts, and Robert Shaw, who wasn't a bad writer himself, edited it down from 5 pages to what you see in the film. Now, I happen to have had a copy of the lined script, which is the script that Charles E. Bryant, who was the script supervisor, was keeping with all the notations and all the cuts and all the original dialogue. I gave that copy to the Motion Picture Academy Library, but I happen to have a scanned copy here. And reading it, you can see exactly what everybody did, but of course, there's no authorship attached. But the script reflects almost entirely what you see in the movie, and Shaw made it even more compelling. So the bottom line of who wrote the Indianapolis speech is, I'm going with John Milius, but others have their hands in it as well.
Sure, sure. I also heard challenging the whole point of or the whole scenario was that Robert Shaw was very distraught during this period. He was going through a terrible divorce from his wife, Mary Ure, and I think there's some feeling that he was drinking heavily at that time, which does not surprise me. Anybody going through a divorce can do that. But talk about classic cinema moments.
Well, yeah, Shaw was drunk on his ass. There's no way around it. In fact, there's a wonderful book by Christopher Shaw Myers, who was a nephew, about the Shaws, which has a large part of Jaws in it. It's a beautifully written book about Robert Shaw that's just out. But Shaw not only was going through some marital problems, he also had to leave the country because he'd stayed X number of days in America. And if he stayed any more, he would have been heavily taxed. So he had to fly out of the country every weekend to Canada, which was subject to American taxation, of course. And so he was traveling all around. He was drunk. He was trying to write, trying to do this part. It turned out extremely well under the circumstances, but it was, yes, you're right, very stressful for him.
It's funny, in reading the Benchley book for the first time. I had never read it, and I was startled at how little of the book is in the movie.
Oh, yeah, it's just a potboiler.
It's a
There's a whole
potboiler.
romantic subplot between Matt Hooper and the chief's wife. And
Chief's
the
wife.
end, the ending of the book,
Yeah, no,
nothing.
nothing. I don't even
Yeah.
remember how the shark dies in the book. Do you?
Yeah, he gets tired, falls to the bottom of the ocean.
That's
Truly, that's
title.
what it is. The shark gives up.
It's
Yeah,
crazy. It's
not
crazy.
exactly the bank we'd expect. Well, this is why Steven Spielberg is a genius and why Carl Gottlieb worked with him and why Werner Fields edited it and everything
It was
worked
brilliant.
perfectly.
It's
Yeah.
funny because I had Lorraine Gary on the show talking about her experiences of how I said, you and Roy Scheider are so compatible on screen. And she said, that's nice. He didn't like me at all.
Isn't she a sweetheart, though?
She's a sweetheart.
Delightful. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
totally delightful, and just a lot of fun to go back in those days. Let's talk a little bit about Conan. Now, John coming out and winning the line obviously has a lot of clout in Hollywood all of a sudden, and Conan is a big, big film with a big, big star, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Was this a positive experience for John?
You must remember that Arnold was not a huge star at the time. He was considered a muscle man, and it was John who created Conan and created Arnold the same way. The script, if you'll recall, was by Oliver Stone and Michael Cimino, two names which were to be reckoned with in very short stead. John, of course, rewrote it largely, but he was able to make it because Dino De Laurentiis coughed up the money. And as I asked John what it was like working with Dino, who was very, very imperious, and John said very, very clearly, well, Conan had to spend time on the Wheel of Pain, and I had to spend time with Dino. But of course, it was a fever dream come true. It was supposed to have countless numbers of mutant Neanderthals attacking and all sorts of things. The big gem at the end was some sort of a paperweight or ashtray they found. This was before CGI, and so they didn't really have all of the way of doing the special effects that they do now. And it was just John and Jerry Lopez, his friend, and of course Arnold, who was Conan. If they didn't have Arnold, they would have had to have built him.
I mean, talk about a perfect casting. I mean, I've over the years I've become a big fan of Arnold because he really stays in his lane, and when he dips completely out of his lane, it's actually hilarious, as in Twins. I mean, he and
He's a
Danny DeVito,
charmer. Yeah,
He's
he's
a
very
charm.
charming.
He's a total charmer.
Yeah.
Definitely. Uh, Bergman. What's Bergman's first name?
Sandal Bergman, who was a dancer
Sandal.
with Bob Fosse, if you know. Yeah, she played,
She
you
was
know,
in All That Jazz. Oh
all that
yeah,
jazz, and of course the great James Earl Jones as Thulsa Doom.
Tulsa Doom.
Yeah, you don't get
It's
any better.
definitely it's a bigger than life film directed by a bigger than life director. So
That's very true. Arnold several years ago, if you remember the iconic Conan on the throne that was on the posters and was part of the whole setup of the film, Arnold had statues cast of it in bronze, and he gave one to John, which is in his apartment now. But it weighed 300 pounds. And so they had to have a whole crew of guys carry it in and find a place in John's place to put it where it wouldn't fall through the floor. So this is big Conan statue in John's house right now, which was delivered personally, of course, by Arnold. I was never there when Arnold was by, but it must have been interesting because the cigar smoke must have filled the atmosphere.
not my favorite atmosphere at all.
Well, these were Cuban cigars. You can bet your rump they were good. Oh, don't tell anybody.
Um, Red Dawn. Now, Red Dawn is a real guilty pleasure film for me. I revel in it in so many ways. It has one of the most amazing visual openings I've ever seen in a film. The whole parachutists arriving while the teacher's teaching military history in the classroom. I think that was Frank McHugh.
Oh, I just as soon as you didn't say the name out loud,
Yeah,
um,
it's a wonderful actor. I've seen him in
Frank
many things.
McRae, I believe it was.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah,
But
who was
Red
also in
Dawn,
Dillinger.
also in Dillinger. But Red Dawn is it's pure Milius. Now, did that start as an original idea of John's, or was it based on something?
It was based on something else, based on another script that he was able to rework. He and I had a kind of a philosophical disagreement, not on what the film was about, but whether you actually could have a land war in America and if Russians could, in fact, uh, parachute into the heartland. But I've got my favorite Milius story involves Red Dawn, if I can tell it now.
Of course.
And that is that he was coming to Boston and I was a critic and I was supposed to interview him, but we went out to dinner first. And he had just come from Washington, D.C., where he was given a tour of the Pentagon by Alexander Haig, who was not only famous for having given the appearance of taking over the country when Reagan was indisposed, by saying, I'm in charge here, I'm in charge here. But also he was on the board of directors of MGM, who had produced Red Dawn. And so John was saying he was given a personal tour of the Pentagon by General Alexander Haig. And he's talking about it. He says, man, the Pentagon's a great place, Nat. I mean, and he's unwrapping a cigar when he does this. You take a golf cart around, okay? And they got a different floor for each of the services, one for the Marines, one for the Army, one for the Navy. And he's going on about the statues and he's going about the paintings and the armor. And I realized he's not talking about the Pentagon as an institution. He's talking about it as a building. And finally he pauses and said, you ever been to the Pentagon, Nat? And I said, well, I demonstrated outside of it a couple of times. And he finishes his cigar, lighting it. He says, we got more in common than you like to think. And it bugs the shit out of you. To me, that encapsulates John entirely. The excitement of a kid with a toy and also somebody who's quite aware of world politics.
Oh, absolutely. Let's see, around 86. I'm working, doing my publicity thing again for a little group called Cinema Group was doing some indie movies, and they did a movie called Born American with with Chuck Norris's son Mike.
Uh-huh.
And it's about three kids who cross the border into Russia and get captured and thrown into a gulag. It's that kind of low-key, melodrama. And they asked me to do some promotions for it. So I came up with the idea of organizing an invasion of Hollywood by the Russians, which involved having a march down Hollywood Boulevard with Russian troops holding Kalashnikovs and two trucks behind them. The trucks I got at the Veluze vehicle dump, and they were both from Red Dawn. So I had my little touch of Red Dawn. And of course, it's illegal to hold a parade without a permit in Hollywood Boulevard. So I had to orchestrate it like our truck broke down and we were just getting them out of there. But as they're leaving, I said, let's have some troops march in front of them to pave the way. It
That's
was,
great.
yeah, it was great. It
Now,
was great.
when you were doing publicity, did you find that politics was a kind of a third rail when you were trying to publicize a film?
Um, I didn't work on a lot of films with political elements. I was the unit publicist on crew generally that got assigned to this a sequel to a good movie, and I got the kind of less than successful second movie. I have such an interesting filmography. I worked on Porky's 2. I worked on Weekend at Bernie's 2.
Uh-huh.
I worked on Eddie and the Cruisers 2.
You-
And I worked on Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, which is the sequel to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So these are not political films. Although I have to say, Porky's 2, the subplot in Porky's 2 is the boys are dealing with Porky again, who is now known to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan. So I arrive in Miami in the summer of '82. I'm about to publicize a movie which is the sequel to the first comedy that's grossed over $100 million. So I'm so excited about publicizing until I get a phone call from Fox saying we're closing the set because of the Ku Klux Klan subplot. They didn't want that to get out. So that was very disappointing because when you're assigned to a movie for 3 months, you want to do something important like get pressed to the set. Well,
Yeah.
that was not what I was doing on that set. I ended up playing a lot of poker with the six guys who were known as the Dirty Half Dozen and got some good stories out of it that way. But
It's, yeah.
Red Dawn is has a remarkable cast of a lot of young people who were virtually unknown at that time.
Hmm.
Charlie Sheen, uh,
C. Thomas Howell,
C.
Patrick
Thomas
Swayze.
Howell, Patrick Swayze,
Yeah.
Jennifer Grey,
Right.
and the lady who plays the mom in Back to the Future. Uh, you know who I'm
Oh,
talking about.
God, yeah. This is terrible. Two old guys talking about not Leah Thompson.
No, Leah Thompson.
Leah
Exactly.
Thompson?
Leah Thompson. Perfect. Very
Yeah.
good. Very good.
Wow.
So, did what was John? I would assume that John once again was on his favorite playground.
He was in his element, and to me, the best scene is the one with Ron O'Neal, where we have the Cuban tank commander who gives a salute to the Americans. That's what it's really about. There's a certain gallantry, even in a ground war, and that's something that John expresses there. Also surfaces again when he made Rough Riders. Excuse me.
It's funny because I remember Ron O'Neal in a very different role. He plays the Kirk Douglas's second in command on the carrier Nimitz in the final
Final
countdown.
Countdown, sure, with Martin
Very
Sheen too. He
Martin
was also
Sheen,
Superfly, you remember.
Superfly.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah,
There
he's
you
a
go.
very, very good actor who didn't get as many opportunities as he should have. He's gone now.
It's funny. I know they remade Red Dawn, and I heard that the original villains in the remake were going to be Chinese,
Oh
but
yeah.
because of the rapprochement with with China, they had to go in and physically change all the insignia so that it was North Korea. What a mess that was.
Well, the world marketplace just changes and you never know who your enemies are.
So true, so true. Um, no, it's one of the original is one of my favorites. I don't really think much of the sequel. But here's a movie that I don't know much about. I have not seen this movie, but I know it's a very important part of John's filmography, Big Wednesday. And of course, you mentioned that he was a surfer from the get-go. What do we know about Big Wednesday?
A lot. I would like to write a whole book about it sometime. It's the film that John had to make before he got too old to make it. It's the story of three surfers, the big names, who go through the 60s and 70s and their involvement waiting for the big wave, which makes it sound very petty. But we're really talking about friendship. Friendship challenged by war, by girlfriends, by alcoholism, by honor. And what happens, especially in the case of the main lead, is when you have a calling. The film stars Jan Michael Vincent, who was a surfer, not a very good one, but a surfer. William Catt, who was a good surfer, and Gary Busey, who learned how to surf to be in the movie. Also, Sam Melville plays a character called the Bear, who is modeled sort of after John. And the bear runs a surf shop. He makes our surfboards and teaches us about the waves. He knew where the waves came from and why. Like the surfers that came before us, we learned everything from the bear. And at one point, Matt Johnson, who is idolized by all the other surfers, feels the pressure. He goes into Bear's surf shop and says, I don't want a bunch of dorky kids looking up to me. And the bear tells him, well, you got to understand it. Before the gods confer greatness upon a man, they test him. Now, these kids look up to you whether you like it or not. So maybe you ought to get one of these boards and go out there and show them something. I'm paraphrasing, but it's the content of it. It's when greatness is handed to you, don't muff it. Use that respect, not to go off on a power jag, but use the respect and use the power to do some good, to provide yourself with a model, a role model that people can follow. Now, I'll show you. I happen to have found this before. Uh, This is my copy of the script of Big Wednesday. The original copy I had John sign, and that's either in the Motion Picture Academy or with the Writers Guild. I forget where I put it. But it's a very, very long script, and it's beautifully written. Just when you read between the dialogue, it's actual poetry. It's that kind of a wonderful, wonderful script. It was also by John and Denny Aberg, Aaberg, who was a surfer and a very good writer. They novelized it together. And what you have in here is not only a sense of tradition, of the surfing tradition, and not a bunch of guys like in a beach blanket movie, but the real tradition of storytelling and conquering the waves and of conquering yourself. The one thing that's missing from the movie is the story of Big Wednesday, what it refers to. I can't possibly summarize it here, but if you buy my book, I was given permission to reprint the thing. It's something that's been obscured for all of these years. Big Wednesday was an absolute disaster. John used his clout to get it made at Warner Brothers. The regime didn't want it to be made, and when it came out, Anthea Silbert, among other people who were production executives, when she wasn't designing schmatas, just hated John, hated the film, and I suspect she helped to kill it. But to me, Big Wednesday is one of the great films. As ham-fisted as some of it might be, it's about friendship and it's about honor and it's about history. And you don't usually find them things around anymore. End of
It,
screed.
if if you watch the film, does John have a cameo surfing at all?
Oh, no, not surfing. Well, he's under the main titles as a surfer. It says directed by John Milius. He appears in a scene shot in or set in Tijuana where he's trying to sell some pot to these surfers. And of course, John didn't do drugs, so it was an amazing cameo.
Cigar was his choice, etc. Um, yeah, I definitely want to see that, and I've got to, I after seeing Red Dawn 63 times, it's time for me to branch out a little bit and see more of
You
his
should.
films.
It also has a wonderful score by Basil Polidorus, who
Oh,
scored several of John's films
oh,
and was one of his classmates at USC. Unfortunately, he's gone now.
John really respected film music, and it shows in his movies. I think that there's just something that we've lost somewhat. I think the idea of orchestral scores of note seems to have there doesn't seem to be as many of them as there used to be, and they don't seem to be. I mean, we all grew up on the Max Steiners and the Korngolds, Franz Waxman, brilliant scores that can play forever, and I think John respected those.
You don't have that kind of symphonic score when you're talking about movies of superheroes. It just you really want more Mickey Mousing in a way. You don't have the evocative scores that help you with the emotion, but you do have people writing them. I mean, it could be James Horner. It could be God, I'm going blank on all these current composers. There are wonderful non-John Williams composers who are doing a terrific job. Hans Zimmer, for one thing. They do it if the film fits, if it applies. But a lot of these movies where the hero wears tights, you're not going to find that kind of evocative music.
Some directors, and I'll switch from music to action, some directors who are not equipped to direct action just flub it badly. John is definitely a terrific action film director. I think he knows where to put the camera, and his action seems very realistic. I'm thinking of Red Dawn. I'm thinking of well, not he didn't direct Apocalypse, but I'm thinking of Win and the Lion.
Hmm.
He seems to understand how men fight and how they fight, and it's fun to watch. I think that's a quality of being able to direct military action properly that we miss him. I wish he was directing still.
There's the military action, and then there's the second unit directors and the stunt coordinators who make it all work. People like Terry Leonard and folks like that who are just wonderful. It's a really important collaboration between the second unit director and the main director to make it all work. And John, of course, has an enormous respect not only for swords but certainly for guns, to say the least.
Oh yeah, and um, now we've kind of talked about his writing, but we don't talk a lot about the ones he didn't films he didn't direct. And for instance, he worked on the Clint Eastwood film Magnum Force. I mean, the second Dirty Harry movie. I think did he work on the first Dirty Harry movie?
He wrote the "I know what you're thinking" speech.
Right, which
Nothing
is,
important.
and I think he also worked on 1941. I think he's did the story.
Well, that's a sore spot for all of us. It may be
Oh,
Steven Spielberg's worst movie. Um, it's an alleged comedy, and I've seen the uncut version, which is like watching World War II in real time. But it was written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, and John was one of the executive producers on it, so he helped it get made. And when it flopped, I think Zemeckis or Gale called him and said, "What do we do about the flop?" And John said, "Seppuku, Bob. That's the only thing that you can do that's
no,
honorable."
I frankly think it's unfair to categorize it as a flop. Maybe it didn't make a lot of money, and it's has kind of a misogynistic quality and a racist comedy at times, a little bit too far. But I find it to be a very entertaining film, especially with that cast. I mean, first of all, it's a mad, mad, mad world, of course, is the original linchpin of grand comedies with millions of stars, it seems. 1941 has everybody in it of that day of note, and they do fun stuff together. I think perhaps it goes a little too far at times, perhaps, and but I have a lot of fun watching it, 1941. Especially again, music, John Williams,
John
fun
Williams.
score.
Well, to me, a comedy has to be funny. So you watch it again for me.
Well, and when you have Slim Pickens on a Japanese submarine being forced
Yeah, well,
to give up the compass, it's just I found that very amusing. And of course, the whole opening riffing on Jaws was very, for me, very funny. That
mhm.
whole idea, but that's a different movie altogether. Well, we miss John. Do you still keep in touch with him, Nat?
As much as I can. He had a devastating stroke in 2014, which robbed him of his speech. And he's still able to comprehend things, but he can't express himself very well. So that and some health challenges he's had, and during COVID, I didn't go over there a whole lot, but he lives in the Los Angeles area. We do sometimes communicate through third parties, and I was over there for his 80th birthday last year,
Oh,
and I was the only one in the room I didn't know. For example, you have Caleb Deschanel over here, you have Randall Kleiser over there. It was a small group of people, but it was fun to see him as the Lord of the Manor, kind of running
well,
things.
when
So
I
it's life is a challenge for him. He's 81 now, and he's had a hard life, and it hasn't gotten much better since the stroke. But he's still hanging in there. The Yeti is still hanging in.
when I send you the link for this podcast, please forward it to him
I
because
certainly will do that.
John, we love you, John. I loved working with you on Motorcycle Gang, which was a hoot and a holler. And I feel like you're still there because we can watch your films every day, and I will watch Big Wednesday.
You
Uh,
better.
what book are you working on at the moment?
Well, I'm still trying to sell. He says, shamelessly holding up Big Bad John, which is available on Amazon and every place. The one that's coming out next in January of 2026 is my first book in 1990 was the biography of William Friedkin. It was handled very badly by the publisher, and used copies have been going for like up to $100 in the years since then, and I'm not getting a penny of it. So Bear Manor Media has been kind enough to reprint it for me. I've added a foreword and I've added an afterword that talks about Billy's career since the book came out, and that's going to be available. It's called Hurricane Billy: The Stormy Life and Films of William Friedkin, and that's going to be out in January all over on everything and everybody. And I have
Well,
a couple of other books in the pipeline, but that's the one I'm pushing
well,
right
you're
now.
going to come back on the show hopefully in February and do a discussion of it because I also have a Friedkin involvement because I worked on the remake of 12 Angry Men.
Oh, good,
So
good. Yeah,
that
we got lots to talk about then.
lots to talk about, absolutely. So, everyone, you have been listening and watching Saturday Night at the Movies. Our guest has been Nat Segaloff, always a wonderful raconteur, working in the heart of Hollywood, using his journalism experience and his love of film to just really transport us to the worlds of these wonderful filmmakers and telling stories that just keep delivering the goods. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
And for those of you who enjoyed the podcast, please give us a thumbs up if you can. We love getting reviews, especially if they're good ones. Uh, and for those of you who like podcasts, I also am a part of Tales from Hollywoodland, which is a podcast I co-host with two producers, Julian Schlossberg and Arthur E. Friedman, and that you can find by just Googling Tales from Hollywoodland. Again, Nat, be well. Thank you and happy holidays.
Same to you.